with our audio, well, figured out. Good afternoon and welcome to this week's Design at Large talk. Next week we have Elizabeth Guffey, so we're very excited to talk. And Ben Pratt, visual artist, is going to introduce you next week. So if you see somebody standing here next week, that person's name is Ben, and I'll be sitting. And this week we have Eliah Spencer as our speaker. Eli's in medical school here. And Eli may be the only person I know who has a degree from Albert Einstein College, so you know, saying with his smile. And his training is as a medical doctor, and his early publications are on the straight and narrow path of being a medical doctor. And somewhere along the way, he'll probably tell you a bit about this. He left the well-trod path and has gotten really interested in design. And I think, as a lot of you now, the goal of the Design Lab is to take human-centered approaches to complex socio-technical systems. And I think the work that Eli's been doing for the past several years really just fits the bill of that totally perfectly. Issues of healthcare, especially around the globe, are about as complex socio-technical as it gets. Also, Eli makes the best barbecue of anybody I know.
Thank you, Scott. Full crowd. Thank you. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Don, for making this possible. So this is Design at Large, and I'm not a designer, but I've been at large. And I thought that would actually be useful. So today is going to be almost an untalk. It's a potentially an order, mildly directed collection of stories. And the reason the stories are going to appear is that they either surprised me at the time, and I still think about them and use them, or they didn't surprise me at the time and they should have, and I'm starting to get them now. So if you're expecting structure, try another talk. But I think I'm going to keep you awake, and that's my intention is, for aspiring designers, builders, actors in the world. The world's a complicated place, and I think being out there, it teaches you things that you didn't learn in class. And if you're receptive to it, I think that's the big class. And so that's my point today, is really to talk about just what I learned in real life. So there'll be very few references other than the occasional time where things we did made the news and caused problems. And so there won't be a lot of celebration. It might even be depressing at points. And that's the point of today's talk. Hopefully a little fun. So there's stories, surprises, and at the end, a very brief set of lessons. And we're going to go back 20 years, a little amendment. So Einstein is in the Bronx. And I usually don't like to talk about academic background, but I did a weird program that combined medicine and biophysics, your typical classical dumb idea. But I was finishing up a very socially oriented medical school program, and you go back and forth to the lab. And I want to quickly tell you about some work I did in graduate school, because it changed my mind. So just on the way to writing my PhD thesis, there were a couple of things that got in the way. And I actually want to talk about that because you might be in graduate school or in college and you're running around thinking, what's life going to be like? And the only thing I can tell you, no idea. Things change quickly, get used to that. So, graduate school. I studied Prion Protein. Does anybody know what Prion Protein is? So this is an infectious protein. And if anybody's a biologist here, they say that's not possible. We have infectious diseases, they're caused by living organisms, maybe by viruses, which are pseudo-living. They all have in common nucleic acids that make up their skeleton and tell their information. But prion doesn't do that, and yet it kills people, and it kills sheep, and it kills cows. How does it do it? And it does it through something called structure-encoded pathogenesis. Just the shape of a protein can kill you. Even worse, this isn't going to work. The protein on the left is one of the most abundant proteins in your body. Let's just call it a pretty shape, okay? The protein on your right is the same protein, it just decided to change shape. That protein kills you. Same structure inside, that is the primary structure, different structure outside. When these guys on the right get together, they actually can convert every other protein around them into that same bad structure, which crystallizes in your body, and over a very rapid, sometimes a month period, you die. So we know this disease typically as mad cow disease. Even the disease, if it wasn't weird enough, gets weirder. The way you get, does anybody know how you get mad cow disease? Okay. So you take sheep brains and feed them to cows, and then humans have to eat the undercooked meat of the cows that ate the sheep brains. And you're like, oh, that's never going to happen. Well, it turns out that's exactly how we raise cows. Primarily in Britain, they're not allowed to do this anymore. So the sheep, if I eat the sheep, I don't get sick. The cow has to eat the sheep brain. It's the strangest thing in the world. My main point about this is that most of the things we study make sense, or they're just a little off. I think this is interesting because it doesn't make sense at all. And yet it's real, so what do we have to do? We have to change our mind about what makes sense. And that was just, I want you to start, that's the perspective that I'm taking with my stories. What do these stories teach us? Okay, so same town, no longer studying the prion protein. I actually had to go back and do a little medical work. So I worked at a primary health care clinic that did methadone maintenance in the Bronx, literally next to Yankee Stadium. We could catch balls. So people know what methadone is? Yeah. So people know what heroin is? Okay. So heroin's bad. Heroin's this drug that kills people. In fact, drugs are bad. People who do drugs, we're told they're bad too. And so the person on the left is doing heroin, and that's my train right there actually. And we think they're bad. So it turns out there's this other drug called methadone, right? It's not quite as good as heroin, you don't feel as good, but you don't end up like this guy on the street, right? So what we see is that trying to tell somebody to quit heroin doesn't really work well. In fact, sometimes they use more heroin because you've annoyed them, right? This is a real problem. Drugs are a problem. What I'm trying to tell you is that telling people to stop doing drugs may not always be the answer. And so there's this concept that we have called harm reduction, which means that sometimes you pull your dogma away and you say it's not either or. Maybe there's an in-between that's healthier for everybody. I'm telling you this because I didn't know it. And when I encountered it, I realized that life really wasn't as black and white as I thought it was, and I started to think a little differently. But I learned one other thing. So our methadone clinic was doing primary health care. So people had to come back for a lab, or they had to take a medication they're supposed to. So what do you think the no-show rate in my clinic was at a place where everybody has to come twice a day for their methadone? So the answer is 0. Everybody comes to your clinic, and if they don't, what do you think happened to them? They're in jail, they're dead, or the methadone wasn't strong enough and they went and got their heroin and they died on the street. So when you don't get a show in your clinic, you call the police, you call the morgue, and you call the hospital. So I learned a whole bunch of stuff there. And actually, I didn't realize how germane it was going to be, because we tend to gamify stuff today to get people to do things we don't want. Well, methadone maintenance in a primary health clinic is a pretty strong gamification. I didn't know about these things. The internet was young at this time. I use this a lot in how I think about motivation, right? It's not putting everybody on heroin. We're going to leave the Bronx. We're going to go to Venezuela, okay? So I wanted to study, I had a 1.5-year grant to go study global health. And I'd written in there, one of the things I was going to study was universal health care. Where do I go to study universal health care? Right? So it's a little bit like trite to go to Denmark. And we could get into Cuba, but it was really hard at the time. So the closest place I could study universal health care in the Western Hemisphere was Venezuela. So we were working in Caracas, and I was actually working in a place called Isla Mujeres. So full disclosure, more time in Isla Margarita, than Caracas. And I'll show you a picture in a second. You'd rather be in Isla Margarita, but either way, I was looking at these primary health care clinics. So what you find is that in many countries, they are utterly devoted to taking care of their own people. We don't talk that way that often. So if you weren't aware of it, or you're from here and haven't left the United States, there's other ways that we can think about our values and what a country is, right? So Venezuela is part of what they call the Bolivarian Revolution. These are states that followed Simon Bolivar, and over time had what are essentially socialist values, okay? The passion for which they view universal health care is something that's very hard for us to get. They can't imagine a world in which they're not taking care of their citizens. Now, I want to talk about what that actually means. So in that clinic I showed you before, Simon Bolivar, on my first day, a man came in. He was maybe 55 years old with what was clearly a large heart attack. So what did they do? Universal health care. They said, oh well, because they didn't actually have anything they could do. So there's a little bit of a Potemkin village here, which is what I want to say is that when you don't have a lot of resources, it's very easy to say everything for everybody. But sometimes when you actually look at a country like America, where there's 300 million people, it gets more complicated, and you actually could give something to everybody, the answer isn't always as straightforward. So the top right corner, that's the truth in advertising. That's actually where I spent 80% of my time suffering through, but there was a clinic to the right. But the lesson here is really twofold. One, there is another way to do this, but two, it's not as easy as you think. I'm just going to keep ripping through these stories. So anybody stop me if you don't like this country or the story I'm telling. I was very excited, in fact, maybe the most excited I've ever been to move to South Africa, which is what I did in 2006. And I went to Somerset Hospital, which is gorgeous, and it's the oldest hospital in Southern Africa. And this is what they call a colored hospital, which means it takes care of colored people. And this is the official title of one of the 5 major races in South Africa. These are codified. I'm not going to go through all of them, but they are black, white, colored, and 2 more. Okay? The hospital on the inside doesn't look as nice. I'm trying to stay away from gore in this talk, but I want to give you that sense. So I went there because we had at the time in America an HIV and AIDS epidemic. It was getting better because of therapy, triple therapy, which was actually invented here at UC San Diego. So I figured I was going to get hands-on experience treating and taking care of patients with HIV. Well, the truth is I saw lots of patients with HIV and AIDS, but I wasn't in Cape Town allowed to treat them. Does anybody know why? So it's 2006, 13 years ago. We have treatment for antiretroviral therapy. We have antiretroviral therapy. Anyone want to scream out? Any ideas?
The president says there's no proof HIV causes AIDS.
Thabo Mbeki, who's a PhD in economics, I think London School of Economics. I've met people who know him well and say this is a totally sane person. He believed in his country. He's trying to help them. And he's credited with directly killing essentially 300,000 people through inaction. And when you look at that in a sense of how viruses spread, it's actually a lot more. You know where he got this idea? He read it on the internet. Do you know who he read it from? One of the better known scientists actually in my field, who's at Berkeley. His name's Peter Duesberg, and he is a tenured professor at Berkeley. Very endearing soul. I think he passed away. But he truly, deeply believed and went around the world proselytizing that HIV was caused by the gay lifestyle. A combination of being gay, amyl nitrate, which are poppers, and cocaine. So how many Africans do you think are following this gay lifestyle? This 0. How many Indian women who died from the trucking routes and having it spread by truckers do you think were living this lifestyle? None. So it's at its face value, absolutely malarkey. But Thabo Mbeki brought this guy on as his advisor. Hundreds of thousands of people died directly, probably millions of people died through inaction, okay? I'm gonna skip ahead in a second and show you a place in Manguzi where I worked. All the doctors went to jail for treating people with HIV. So the point of this is, you might have the technology. It was invented at Stein Institute here in San Diego, but things are going to stop you that are very surprising. So when you're designing out there and you're trying to save the world pushes back in ways that are unexpected. Here's another example. 2 measles outbreaks while I'm there. One at the hospital I told you about, the colored hospital. One in Stellenbosch. So Stellenbosch is this magical little kingdom, not real kingdom, near South Africa, near Cape Town, where It's almost an entirely Dutch town, and they have beautiful little Dutch homes, and it's predominantly white, and they make some of the best wine in the world. It's literally Napa Valley on steroids. Why would they have 2 outbreaks, one in a white hospital, one in a black hospital, in a this is a modern country. South Africa is a relatively modern country. Well, again, life is complicated. So, in the black and colored areas, the procurement for vaccines had changed from getting all of their vaccines through a validated, I think it was a World Health Organization program, to a new supplier. And I'm not going to call out any countries, but it was a different country that supplied those vaccines, and those vaccines were, some were expired, some were literally water. No attempt to even make them look like vaccines, just a vial full of water. Put that with the kids. So the colored hospital got this because people didn't value them enough and sent them fake vaccines. Why did the white people? How did they don't tolerate this. They had better vaccines. True story, they had good vaccines. Why did they get it? Well, they were online. They believed the anti-vax stuff. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but I'm going to say it's complicated. So now, in 2019, we see what? We see measles outbreaks. Do you realize we have polio outbreaks? Is anybody here old enough to remember when we eradicated polio? Okay, well, we didn't anymore. So does anybody know why polio is coming back? Any ideas? So it's the story on the left. So in 2000, when did we kill bin Laden? So the way we got Osama bin Laden was IARPA, which is like DARPA, funded the CIA to fund a fake vaccine clinic in rural Pakistan, where they suspected that Osama bin Laden was. And it was actually a real vaccine clinic, but what they were doing was taking each needle, taking it out, and putting it in as a DNA sample. And then they sequenced all of those DNA samples, actually with an Illumina sequencer here in San Diego. And they figured out that who were the relatives of bin Laden that they knew were harboring him, and they found him, and we know it happened. What do you think the response of communities was to this? Trust in the vaccination campaigns around the world? It's pretty amazing. So you saw effects everywhere from, so this happened in Pakistan, you saw outbreaks in Afghanistan, you saw outbreaks in Sudan, you saw outbreaks literally everywhere. Word got around. Again, life's complicated. So now we're going to go up and to the right, but stay in South Africa, in a town called Manguzi. So this is a village of Tembe people with 60,000 villagers, a hospital with, on and off, we had 400 staff and 20 doctors, all of whom are white, and most of whom are Afrikaner, which means they speak a Dutch dialect over the English. There's 2 forms sort of lighter-skinned people in South Africa, and this was the Dutch form. So I got to this hospital no longer having expectations, okay? I've already learned lessons 1, 2, and 3, but I was still blown away. Because sitting at this gate, and to the left is the gate that goes into the hospital on my first day, and this is a true story, a Jeep goes by, it says KwaZulu-Natal Health Services, and there is a bullet right in the passenger, in the driver's side door. And there's a guy in the back of there chained. And I go to the hospital director and say, what's going on here? He goes, oh, that'll be your car. So what had happened was they carjacked this doctor. They shot him through the side of the door, because that's easier. They open it, they pull the doctor out, they take the car. So what did my hospital director, this Afrikaner who's talking to me, do? He went to the chief and he said, you bring back my car, the person who shot my doctor, and it never happens again, or we shut down the hospital and you get no more care. That was the day before. So I show up, the car's coming back, there is a person who may or may not have been the guilty party locked in the back, right? And then that prompts Colin to tell me this story. He says, Eli, I'm going to tell you the difference between a living doctor and a dead doctor. And I'm actually subbing the word doctor for a different word that I can't use. It's a bucky, which is their word for a 4-wheel drive, a gun, and a full tank of gas. This is his survival cues for a new doctor fresh off the boat in his little town. And then he says, and oh, by the way, you're going to need this. And it was a cell phone. And this was still little new cell phones. So that cell phone is kind of what changed my life. And this is an inflection point that I'll tell you about, because I started to see the power of networks. So one, in that cell phone, and we actually had 3, every doctor who'd ever come through, as long as that cell phone had been alive, had put their own cell phone number in there, and there was a code. First name, John. Second name, specialty. I want to be an obstetrician. Third part, where they were. So you'd see John, obstetrician, Cape Town. That was how you read through it, right? And then earlier you'd have these codes like, Aaron on call. That meant somebody who lived there and was on call. What does this mean practically? It meant that you could use this phone in the middle of the night to call the alumni of this hospital. And the way these hospitals work is doctors come there for 1 to 2 years and they go back to nicer places, okay? But that meant in the middle of the night, when you are lost, you can thumb through your phone and say, John, obstetrician, Cape Town, and call, and they would all answer the phone the same way, yo Manguzi. They knew it was the Manguzi phone, right? And I'd say, listen, my name's Eli. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I have no idea what I'm doing. If I don't do something right now, this person's gonna die. And they'd say, no problem, I've had this call 50 times. Here's what you do. That kind of stuck with me. I didn't get it. But it became what my postdoc in informatics was about, and why I sort of think, networks are important and people are important. So I think I'm going to treat HIV at least this time. We couldn't treat it in Cape Town. We're out from the villagers. So this hospital was set up essentially to surreptitiously or illegally provide antiretroviral therapy to the villagers. There was only one problem. We had no referrals. There was nobody coming in with HIV, but we know it's everywhere. So there's another healthcare system and a functioning economy in South Africa that is way older and much more robust than the Western one, and that's the witch doctor healthcare system. These are called sangomas, okay? And you think sangomas must be really nice doctors, they take care of their villagers. No, they are businesses. You don't go to a sangoma empty-handed. You don't go in there and say, hey, listen, I have a sore throat, can you treat me? You say, hi, here's my chicken. I'm not kidding, I have a sore throat, will you treat me? And the sangoma says yes, takes the chicken, treats you, you go home, hopefully got better. It's an economy, nothing judged, it's just rightful. But we were a threat. If we took these referrals, the sangoma would lose business. Lesson 2 from this South African doctor, who, by the way, my family is, we are literally, I'm telling you about myself, we are hippie Buddhist Jews. I don't know what church is. If I went to Easter, it was later in life. Colin, the doctor who ran this hospital, was an evangelical Christian, okay? And so not somebody who I'd encountered before. I'm not making a judgment here. I didn't think we would be able to get along. Obviously, I'll tell you we did. This guy had not just wisdom that was couldn't get to, but speed. The decisions he made were in real time. So, how do you think he solved this problem? Okay. So the cell phone worked so well for us, he said, what would happen if we gave a cell phone to a sangoma? So he goes to the village and he says, Mr. Sangoma, I have a deal for you. I'll give you this cell phone and I'll pay you a base credit, keep you going a little bit, and then I'll actually give you credit every time you send us a referral. And actually in Africa now, actually throughout the world, it started called M-Cash. We can transfer money by cell phones. We couldn't do that in those days, but you could transfer cell phone credits, and you can sell cell phone credits. So there's actually a secondary cash market for cell phone credits, and it was as good as cash. Guess what? We got referrals. All right? So this guy, I could sit here all day and tell you Colin's stories. Every one of them ways I wouldn't have thought of something. Every one of them ways we can't teach in a class. Anybody think I can put this in a textbook? No. But worthy lessons. All right. We went to South Africa. I actually came back here to San Diego, or came here for the first time, to work in Mozambique. So I'd been in South Africa, we'd met some folks I really wanted to work with in Mozambique, and I knew we had a tie here in San Diego. So I came to San Diego from South Africa to go to Mozambique. So this is Maputo starting 2006. Really, this is 2006 to 2015. By the way, these are stories. The dates may vary, the facts are close. A lot of these things unfold over longer periods of time and they get condensed. So Maputo is a long story. This is actually a 10 and still unfolding story. But I want to tell you a little bit about why we went there and what happened. So working with Chip Schooley here at UC San Diego, who was our infectious disease chair. He now runs global health programs, or actually international programs for the university. We'd originally written a Doris Duke Foundation grant, which we didn't get, on health system strengthening in the US and Mozambique through symmetry. Meaning we were going to go to Mozambique and provide resources that were useful to them. They were going to come here and provide resources that were useful to us. So what they have in Mozambique, any guesses? Lots of disease. America, we actually were kind of boring. We have lots of disease, but it's way more interesting over there. I'm not saying that's fun to be a patient there, but you can learn a lot, right? We have the newest technology. So through symmetry, we tried to set this up. Point was, we didn't get the grant. Chip was on a plane with his friend Eric Gooseby, who's about to become the AIDS ambassador for the United States, and Chip tells this story, and Eric says, that's brilliant. I'm about to take over PEPFAR, and all of the work we do is basically paternalistic. We come into a country, we say we have answers, we have money, we're going to do stuff. And the way we had set this up was there was no US PI. We were co-PIs, and the lead was Mozambican. And it was entirely what we would now call participatory design or co-design. I didn't know these terms at the time. And it was entirely community driven. They always had to say what they wanted, right? Well, we got $20 million, so then rearing to go, literally probably the dumbest I've ever been. We show up to Mozambique with $20 million and say, how can we help? Please don't go to other countries and say, how can I help? Just wait. So we did good. We brought, I literally can take credit for this, the first iOS devices to Africa. I had them before they hit the stores in my backpack on the earliest flight to Joburg, which is the fastest way you can get there. So we had iPads in Africa before you had iPads here. We had iPod touches and Android very early. And think about it, if you're going to another country with little infrastructure, this is perfect. You can put all of your textbooks. That's an e-library right there. In fact, it took me 5 years to get this across to the NIH. We were building an e-library, and it had no physical space. And they couldn't figure that out, right? So our e-library was entirely mobile. This actually turns out to be really useful. It's harder to steal. The devices can be moved around. So I was feeling good. We did other things. We brought the first portable ultrasound to Mozambique. My students in engineering built a cell phone attachment for microscopes so they could take pictures and do telemedicine. We took it a step further, and we built a microscope that could be left in Mozambique but driven by iPad in America by a pathologist so they could do telemedicine together, right? We founded a research institute that could sort of like the teaching a person to fish story. They started to bring in more money, their own resources. So, and this doctor on the left, who's one of my closest friends, we basically all fell in love with each other. If you meet these Mozambicans, you will fall in love with them too. They are wonderful people. So they're medical doctors. They work their asses off. I'm going to swear today. They get up very early in the morning, and by the time they're doctors, they have 3 kids. They're not starting late. They're running families. After work, being residents, they go to their second job because being resident doesn't pay you. So the first thing we did with our MEPI program was brought internet. And my nickname in Mozambique is Internet. And I literally installed internet there. And so we have doctors who we said, you are amazing. We are so proud to work with you. You're the best. So they went online and they looked to see what other doctors were doing around the world, and they realized that they were getting paid crap, their conditions were crap. And we also taught them about Facebook, and this will be important later, but not about privacy settings, which actually probably didn't exist at this time, thank you, Zuckerberg. So what happened to in a socialist country that's been empowered by really nice Americans who brought them internet and showed them Facebook? They organized and they went on strike, okay? And I take credit for this, right? So we also have to take credit for the other part, which was we didn't really tell them too much about privacy settings. And so the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Justice were a little more savvy. So they went onto this thing called the internet, and they went onto this thing called the Facebook, and they're like, well, who is leading this movement? Well, it was Manuel Tomas, my friend on the left. And it's right there as the guy who created the group. It's actually next to it's our Facebook group. This is the UC San Diego Mozambique Facebook group that they were doing a public channel, and literally They were yelling at the government. Just a note, don't yell at governments on public channels. In fact, there's no such thing as privacy, so don't do it anywhere unless you really mean it. They put him in jail. Okay, this was covered almost everywhere in the world but America. I couldn't find any US coverage of this. The only coverage you see is actually in an article we wrote where we mention it, but it was actually covered everywhere else. I mean, I like that Al Jazeera is my trustworthy news here. So I want to tell you though, in parallel, there was a second group of people I worked with. And there was a place called the Centro de Informatica, which is the Center for Informatics. You wouldn't think a country like this would have one, they did. And in fact, they'd already doubled down on open source because they recognized that in a low and middle income country, open source technology was going to be probably more useful for them. So my group of computer scientists started a company called Braveheart Productions. They took smart Android phones, they built an app that created the first, it was basically a gig economy 911 system that allowed people with either a real ambulance or a fake ambulance to sign up. And they could then say, many people didn't have cars, how do I get to the hospital? So they could text that they needed to get to a hospital, and it was basically ride share for healthcare. And they went a step further and they actually played a game with the two main cellular phone companies and said, hey, why don't you make this a free service? It'll attract customers to you. We're going to make it exclusive. It's either you or Voda. And they went to MCell first, and MCell didn't want them to go to Voda. So they paid these guys an actual pretty large sum of money. And 4 computer programmers were made men right there. Okay? They didn't go to jail. Just 2 different stories. All right. We're leaving Africa. We're going to go to Haiti. People still with me? Good. Still got time? A little bit. People remember the earthquake? Okay, this is 2010. This date is not when the earthquake happened, it's when I happened there. Those are the results of me getting there. So no, this is a horrible earthquake. This devastated Port-au-Prince. This devastated most of the island. It's just hard to explain. If you'd been to Haiti before, you wouldn't know you were in Haiti afterwards, okay? So I was there working with the American Red Cross, and we were working to develop an e-health system for Haiti. This is a little ironic. This is what Haiti looked like at the time, and we figured this was the perfect time to be putting in a new mobile health-based healthcare system, okay? We tried really hard to do this. We actually got a proposal through. I presented in French to Parliament. Had some help. It was accepted. I couldn't believe this. We actually were about to do the health plan for Haiti. So we came back and there was a problem. None of the people who we'd worked with 3 months earlier were still in government. Okay? The head of the Haitian Red Cross had been deposed. The Minister of Health had been deposed. Every member of Parliament who we had worked with were deposed within 3 months. So when we came back, there wasn't a single person in Haiti who knew we were. We had a signed contract, right? To be clear, this was a good thing. We should not have been doing what we were doing, but politics matter. And I want to just say, like, even the best laid plans, you need to understand this. What about, people know what the top corner is? Those are the blue hats, the UN. So they're in Haiti because in this area called Cité du Soleil, which is the part of Port-au-Prince, is one of the most violent places in the world. There are just gunshots everywhere. So the UN came, they brought peace. Does anybody else know what the UN brought to Haiti in 2013? They brought cholera. And they were very nice Bangladeshi soldiers who had no idea they were carriers. They weren't trying to hurt anybody. But this poor country that's just been devastated by earthquake and now completely full of NGOs got a second hit. How do you think Haitians feel about outside help these days? It's not that they don't want it, but they're a little bit more reticent than they were before. Best laid plans. All right, so I'm just gonna keep going. Uganda, this is the one that's gonna make people's, this is a strange one, all right? So, as a linked work to the stuff we did in Mozambique, we had a program working with the same populations, but now military. So these are militaries in Africa who are taking care of patients who have HIV. So we were doing this in Mozambique, we were doing this in South Africa and Botswana, and in particular, we did this in Uganda. And so Uganda has the Ugandan People's Defense Force, and these are the people that fought Kony's war. People know Kony? Anybody know this name? How about child soldiers? Okay, so child soldiers were essentially defined as being 6 or greater and in the military. And Kony was doing it, so why not have the Ugandan People's Defense Force do it too? So I have friends who are 38 years old and are retiring from UPDF with 30 years of experience. Okay? I want to say one thing. They're not scarred. The ones I worked with, they don't talk about PTSD or shock. It's a very confusing situation, right? But that's not even the confusing part. So we're working at Bombo Hospital, and I have 2 stories to tell you. So the top right corner, this one looks a little different. He's one of my students. Cut off is a 3rd one, okay? And as you can guess, the rest of these folks actually belong in the picture, okay? So this is Bombo Hospital, which is the main military hospital near Kampala, Uganda. And we were there to put in an e-health and e-learning portal, okay? It actually oddly looks like the UCSD portal today. This was when we were starting it probably 5, 6, 7 years ago. The interesting thing I found was that the doctors didn't respect my computer scientists. And I'm not, how many people here are computer scientists or write code? Raise your hand. Okay, so the thing that you've probably figured out in computer science is it's safe to make mistakes, right? You run a unit test that doesn't work, no problem. Your code doesn't work, you run it again after making a change. We don't have that luxury in medicine, and it creates a very different ethos, okay? So the doctors think that my guy over here is essentially a sociopath, which from their perspective he is. And he really can't understand what they're talking about because he's a computer scientist and they're a doctor, so they didn't really talk or respect each other. So I kind of tried to convince my computer scientists that they have to operate differently because they're functionally doctors too. The doctors are either counting on them or somebody else might be, and that changes the expectations. So I made them take a little oath, and it was like a modified Hippocratic oath. It's actually something called Maimonides' prayer. And I made the doctors take the same oath because it's different from the Hippocratic. And then I introduced the 2 teams together as doctors again. And luckily, you know, in English in Uganda and most of the rest of the world, you can actually call other people doctor. It's an honorific. It just doesn't mean medical doctor. In Italian, dottore literally just is it's an honorific. This changed entirely how everyone on this team worked together, and it was an important lesson for me because it was an experiment, okay? I'm not even at the bulk of what was weird about Uganda. Why were we in Uganda building this e-health learning platform? Well, it was to support the people taking care of the HIV, and it was to promote this program. So the single most effective, besides antiretroviral therapy, measure against HIV and AIDS is male circumcision, adult male circumcision. Perhaps one of the strangest sets of words that I'll ever utter. But worse than that, we did this. And so what we found is that adult male circumcision lowers the rate of transmission by 60%, okay? We have flu vaccines that are almost never that good. So vaccines aren't 100%. So this is like a pretty decent vaccine. But does anybody else think this is really weird? It is, okay? We circumcised over 10 million adult males. And I don't want to get into it, but there was a lot of interesting ethical questions, co-design questions, paternalism questions, that just made me realize life again, as the point of all of these stories, is complex, okay? I now have friends from the UPDF. I've now worked on a project that circumcised 10 million people, and actually my family's Jewish. Typically that would be called a moil, and we actually looked, the greatest moil in the history of the world, circumcised about 100,000 people. So we did 10 million. So there was a little joke that we were moving on, okay? And closing down quickly. So Colombia, working in Tumaco province on an mHealth grant from the NIH. Tumaco is FARC-controlled territory. This is the hybrid revolutionary military narco-trafficante. We actually have a letter from the FARC governor letting us in with conditions. So in FARC territory, you will be shot if you have a mobile phone, which is honestly good practice. We all should get rid of our mobile phones. But this is not a joke. We were dumb enough to think about a mobile health project in an area like this, but it was needed because there was a big disease and this is the right answer, but we had to really think carefully about it. Co-design. So the conditions were, the project was run by the mayor of the town. Only the community health workers were allowed to go through the province, and we basically stayed in Cali, Colombia, and the entire project was basically bottom up, top down, ignored as much as possible. This was people in the community showing what they wanted to do, how they wanted to do it, and my metric of success here is like, we didn't hurt anybody, and the project worked, but I certainly learned under new circumstances that community-driven approaches can be more sustainable. That's the point here, okay? So this is just, because this is maybe the most kludgy thing we did, which was taking cell phones, mobile health technology, and FARC guerrillas, and thinking that there was something sane here. I'm gonna take us home, and we're gonna be heading, we're on like the almost landing, 4 to 5 minutes to go if you're curious. So I just want to talk a little bit more. So most of these have been stories that have just a quick lesson. This is a little bit more about work that we're doing here in the lab, but each one also has a lesson, okay? So true story, I actually left the Ugandan project because of ethical concerns, not over male circumcision, but over US contractors and the behavior of us in this program, and it was not acceptable. Came back to America, said I'm never gonna do this again, and I got a call, true story, from the Gates Foundation saying, Eli, do you want to fingerprint babies? So this person knew I had just stopped this adult male circumcision program, feeling very guilty, not feeling happy about the program, and I thought it was a joke. But it turns out that we lose babies all the time, and that it's important not to lose them. We need to track them for vaccines. We need to send them home from the hospital with the right mom. This happens more than you think. 50% of infants will have what Don would call a near miss, okay? And because we have kind of a Swiss cheese model in America, we generally don't lose babies, but the dark underside is that it's pretty darn close. The problem was Gates had given $14 million over 7 years to the experts in the field who literally all took the existing adult technology and tried to make it better. So this is the Ford story of faster horses, right? So the only thing that I knew when I got this was A, I was literally the last in line. They had tried everyone else who knew what they were doing because I didn't. And actually this is humility, said I'm not gonna try what they tried and think I'm gonna do better. So we thought about this from a human-centered design perspective, and this actually was one of the first projects I've ever done where we started with a human-centered design perspective. And we said, what's the real problem? And we're not gonna stop until we've reframed it. 2, who are the humans in the system and what's their view on this whole thing? And the humans happen to be moms and babies and doctors. And what's the physiology of the user? What's the context of the user? And it turns out babies, and I knew this from med school, and maybe this was a little leg up, they're super soft. And I knew this also, that when you fingerprint things, you ever been fingerprinted and you press down? So what do you think happens to really baby soft skin on a piece of glass? It goes away. So the reason you couldn't fingerprint babies was the technology was the problem. Okay, so if I say nothing else, that's a lesson here. The technology can be the problem. So the way we solved the problem was to take away the technology in the way we had it before, and we use non-contact imaging. We hold the finger in space in an ergonomic, behaviorally acceptable manner. We use baby behavior and reflexes instead of working against them. And I never thought I'd say this, our group is the first group to fingerprint newborns. Okay, and we did this with human-centered design. So in some ways, that's sort of the first question. What's your name? In medicine, we literally say, what's the first question? What's your name? Identify the patient. What's the next thing you ask somebody after their name? How are you feeling? So we've gone a step further with this technology now, and after asking this question, we've built a low-cost sort of tricorder that will measure all your most basic health needs and none of your non-basic ones. This is literally the simplest, cheapest set of what we call vitals that you can measure, plus ID. So then, I know your name, I know something's wrong, what's the next thing? What is it that's wrong? So some of the work in my lab is that it's really nice to have these diagnostics in America that we have, like an Illumina, we can sequence everything. It's really expensive, and the rest of the world's not gonna work this way. We'll run out of money. So in my lab, we actually try to train yeast through synthetic biology to do the work of these expensive diagnostics to make what we call renewable diagnostics. And so this is the logic of how my lab works. And now I just want to tell you about projects that are a little bit broader than me and involve more of the design lab, more of some of the people in this room. I'm calling them out: Don Norman, Melanie McComsey, our usual working dog who isn't here today, Ovid. So we've been working on a project called Launch, which is a public-private partnership between the FCC, the National Cancer Institute, University of California Design Lab and School of Medicine, Amgen, which is a drug company, and the University of Kentucky. We're basing this around cancer care and the moonshot, but the bigger question/problem is, if you're going to launch a moonshot, moonshots are always big, right? And they're usually thought of as like maybe there's 10 very smart people huddled in a room with infinite resources solving this moonshot. And I think what we're trying to do with Launch is flip this on its head and say, well, what happens when you actually stop that thinking? Stop thinking that a group of experts are going to close themselves in a room and fix a problem. Because we're not, first of all. And if you think about Appalachia and Kentucky, where we're about to go, I don't know what anybody here from Appalachia? It's different, okay? I don't have a place there. I'm not going to answer the questions there. We thought maybe they could. And so Launch is about flipping innovation on its head and starting to work so that communities solve their own problems. And actually, some of these communities have a lot of problems. Those are the ones you want to go to, because this is the lead user expertise that happens when there's lots of problems. And there's a weird unintended effect of this. When I go to a place with lots of problems and I let them solve their problems, if we don't screw with the resource allocation, they can actually make money out of that. And maybe places with problems eventually become places with solutions, and if we change our incentive model, that actually might solve some of their other problems, like the money stuff, okay? So Launch is just simply about flipping how we think about innovation and letting communities start to do that. And the work I'm doing with Dawn and Melanie and others is that we don't really know the answers at all. So the first thing we're doing is just meeting people. And if I can say so, Melanie, who's a postdoctoral anthropologist, has been doing what she calls deep hanging out. And this is going to a place and meeting people for basically no other reason than meeting them and understanding what life is like, and then being able to build a network so when you want to work together, there's somebody there to pick up the phone. And we're going through we're segueing from us having ideas to meeting people to working together on problems to looking at what would it take to erase us from the picture and what are the tools that could be left behind. This is what we're trying to do with the community-powered innovation. All right, this brings me to my last work, which is really the newest work that's been going on. And this is something that's been brewing with Dawn, Henrik Christensen, Ramesh Rao. We have other cast of characters. And this takes Launch from Appalachia in America to all of us. And it says, let's keep that logic, which is there are too many problems. They're too big. They're changing for any group of experts to solve this. It's just not going to work. There are 7.5 billion people. How many problems can be so big that when you divide them by 7.5 billion, they're intractable? So the point of Earth 2.0 is what happens when big Earth-scale problems get divided by many people. And you can't just say, great, 7.5 billion people, go solve Earth's problems. Well, those people have to be resourced, they have to be educated, they have to be able to coordinate and communicate. The one thing they probably don't need is an incentive to make the planet stable and safe, or to take care of themselves. So we really believe that modern information communication technology, which allows this planet to get flat, we can all talk to each other through space, plus a little bit of different thinking in how we design. So instead of designing square Volvos so everybody gets a Volvo but it's all the same, we start to think more like Legos, where people can start to mix and match on their own. So that's the point when you have this Lego-like thinking, that we start to take problems that seem impossible, and oftentimes they can simply go away because somebody else can solve them for you. The main point here is start to think of the planet as one place. Stop thinking of something over there or them. We're kind of all in this together, yeah? So Earth 2.0 is essentially first figuring out where are the problems, where's the innovation. Those may not be the same places, and if they're not, that's not maybe the best idea, okay? Where's the money? What's worked? What hasn't worked? You think these are answers everyone knows? But we've asked. We've asked the National Endowment for Science, Technology, and the Arts in Britain what works and doesn't work in challenges. They've been running challenges for 300 years. They said, we have no idea. We said, who else is doing this well? They said, we have no idea. So our point is, let's learn what works and doesn't. Let's start to create a space on this planet where people can post problems, work together. And finally, let's get those things out. Let people know. And once we start to see where the big problems are, what they are, I don't think we even know that yet, we can start to use that intel to direct our resources in different ways. Okay? So, now we're present today. These are my lessons. Not structured, not numbered, not to be taken any more seriously than you've taken anything else I said today. There aren't edge cases. There is no spherical cow. When we design things in the real world, it's super complicated. And there are a lot of ways we can learn to deal with this. Things like Dawn talks about of incrementalism and muddling through. Okay? Things like Scott talks about, which is that distribute this process so that when many people trying many things, that might be smarter. There's no one you can ignore. Guarantee you ignore somebody, they're going to be your enemy. You go in there, you think your problem's solved, and you forgot that one person, they'll find a way to make sure you don't succeed. Okay, so human-centered design is recognizing it's all the humans, especially the ones you didn't want to talk to. No doubt, there's genius and expertise everywhere. In fact, I'm not sure it's enriched in universities. Okay? I'm pretty sure that the people who are really kicking butt on this planet, they may not be here. Some of us are good, we're definitely trying, but we're not the only smart people, okay? This is good to know because there's a lot more people on the planet than there are people in universities. So if we need to get an army and save the planet, don't worry. There's lots of smart people. We just have to find ways to work together. I think I sort of belabored this. Big problems. If you believe that there's lots of people there working together, they get smaller. So that's divide by as many as you can. We all recognize sometimes too many goes the other way, right? Embrace diversity, surprise, and complexity. These are things that usually scare us. These are what we should learn from, okay? Diversity is the thing that you can't think of. It's the thing you can't do, right? But a team that's diverse can do almost anything. Surprise. If you're surprised, you can learn from that. You won't be surprised again. Complexity. We call this complex socio-technical systems. It's just real life. It's not simple. Embrace it. Okay, and my final dogma here is, at least today, we do not have the ability to change humans, and we can't fix and redesign the planet instantaneously. The one thing we can do, and I think this is the most important thing, because it's essentially free and much more fungible, is we can change our minds. So put some effort into that. Put some effort into strengthening and changing your mind, maybe even other people's minds. Now there's arguments about if you can change somebody else's mind, but I think you can. And the final one is that if we design for people, people are probably going to do the right thing. So the more we do that, the more we're going to actually solve some of the biggest problems. So I just have one last thing. So how many people in this room are a professor? Will you raise your hand and keep it up? Okay. How many people here are not a professor but are an expert in something? Okay. Yeah? How many people think they have some valuable expertise? How many people think they have nothing to offer on this planet? Good, okay. So we have a tendency to have a bright light on a glowing character who's really smart, right? And we think that magical person is going to solve our problems. They never do. There's a lot more people in this room than there are me, right? So I'm not going to make you do it because it's like 5 o'clock. But the light should dim here. They should go up there. You literally need to stand up and look at the people around you. This is who solves the problem. It's not someone else. It's not an expert, right? We all have expertise, and that's what we need to do, is build that expertise, do the thing you love, and maybe think just a little bit, does that thing I love make the planet just a little better? Make me a little healthier, contribute just a little bit to my community, because just little bits times 7.5 billion people, that's a lot, okay? So I'm hopefully speaking to the young here, but that's all I have to say. and I did it in less than an hour. Thank you very much for listening.